Oh, I should have said, this is a class that we're making up from the Modjeska school that you were supposed to be on, but you had an airplane problem somewhere in America, which most of us can sympathize. So you're here now.
I'm here now. Yeah, so I should say, there's the microphone, right? Yes. Okay, so I should say first, thank you to the Progressive Network for inviting me back, even though I had that snafu this summer. I double booked myself and had a very tight window to get here, and I couldn't get here. So I apologize. I see Tom Summers in the room, so I know that there are people who know a lot more than me, other heroes who are here. You guys, I actually want this to be more of a conversation. So I sent 3 things for people to read. I know you guys sent out the piece I wrote for the Proud Heritage Encyclopedia. Also the talk I gave about the Amendment 1 campaign. I don't know if you sent the 1998 New York Times piece about the gay movement here. And then I know you have very, yes.
We didn't send the New York Times piece because there was a paywall problem. We tried to get around it every which way, but instead I put a point piece, which was written at the same time about the same stuff, interviewing the same people. So
okay. But what I thought I'd do to start, this is weird, the hybrid thing. So I'm going to talk to you guys. So what I thought I'd do to start really is just show 5 moments from South Carolina history. Okay. Oh, my. Okay. Oh, got you. Yeah. So I just thought I'd show 5 things from South Carolina history just to get started and thinking about where we are here. So earlier this year, and I hope this is okay as a way to start, because I don't used to when I did these, I did a kind of lecture. I talked about the major historical events in the state. I talked about major lessons learned, and I can talk about major lessons learned, but I just thought I would start with this. Thinking about where we are. What this is a what this is from I gave a presentation for the Department of Justice for Pride Week this summer. It was arranged through their HR people who do like Asian American Pride Week. Someone gives a lecture. Gay Pride Month, someone gives a lecture. So it's kind of cool because I was on Zoom with all 95 district or federal Department of Justice offices all over the nation, but it was also kind of like terrifying. Like, what do you say to these people? So I decided to keep it close to South Carolina and talk about the things to learn here. And so what I started with was sorry, I'm going to share this, multitasking. I'm not going to show the whole slide, but I want to show a couple, or the whole slideshow, but I want to show a couple. I did this for them, and I talked about who's we the people. And I found a great interview from someone in California, a lesbian couple, who they were talking, it was a PBS series about the Constitution and the preamble to the Constitution, which we all know. So I played the Schoolhouse Rock bit, we the people, and we all know this, right? I remember being in civics class, and that's how we answered the question on the test. We're all humming it in our heads. But the couple who were being interviewed, it was about marriage organizing before marriage equality. And they said they literally did not feel like they were part of the we in the preamble, given the way people were organizing against them. So I thought that would be kind of a way to focus for the justice folks. Also, I gave them the example too. I think we can be very, very personal. When I went home, I was going to go to Arkansas in 2016 to do a video for the book I had just published. And when I called my mother to say that we wanted to come and do filming, because I was taking a former student of mine who's a filmmaker and brilliant, who was going to do all the footage, she very clearly said, "Who's we?" Right? She did not want my husband coming with me. So we was a very tricky word. Who's we at that point? So but what I did with them, sorry, I'm going to run through these things. I'm sorry I didn't. First of all, I talked about the first time we tried to use that for pride here was this ad. We the people includes everyone. This was the brilliant, it was actually the brilliant idea of Don Hare, who was on the board of Pride at that moment. It was for Pride 2006. We ended up, I forget what our actual theme was that year, but this was before we had decided on a theme. So we wanted to do advertising beforehand to get people to save the date. this was a moment of incredible publicity. What I put there, just thinking about, minimize this, thinking about that moment, we did our first LGBTQ outreach at the state fair that fall. People were terrified. They were sure we'd be yelled at and cussed at and assaulted. But it was actually just lovely. And part of the reason we did that was when we did training on marriage equality, what we learned is all over the nation, people who were movable when you told them your story. So we just wanted to create a place where people could hear our stories. That was the only reason we were there. We got a contract with the Columbia Promotional Magazine for their April-May issue that October. The ad was rejected by the publisher. Specifically, he said this was deemed unacceptable for publication. And interestingly, that was the same year that South Carolina passed Amendment 1 and prohibited recognition of any same-sex union. You tell me, is this ad unacceptable for publication? And I'll name the magazine. It was Columbia Metropolitan, right? Sent all the dentist offices and hotels in this city. But this was considered offensive. We even explicitly did not use the words gay and lesbian, thinking it would pass muster if we did that. It's just the rainbow flag, right? Which was symbol enough for people who would know what that meant. But they turned it down. So for me, that was just a moment when we the people was a phrase that was charged in very clear ways. So what I did with that group is I talked about, well, I went forward. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to move forward and it seems to be stuck. We'll do it again, sorry. I'm used to doing this in my classes. Something always messes up. Does it not? There you go. Yes, I'll just move through these. So just moments in our history. Slideshow from the present. Oh, it's going to go all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, okay. Thinking about our history, October 1958. This is in this is in your readings, but I just thought it'd be useful for us to think about 5 really important moments in our history, thinking about the LGBTQ movement in this state. There were mixed bars in Charleston. Often the front part would be everyone, and then there would be a back part that the gay people went to, but it was mixed. That was the way they got around it. In October on Halloween, I'm not going to remember their names. I need to remember their names. Yeah, Jack Dobbins, who was also a bartender and a business executive, but he bartended on the side to meet people at the bar. He was doing a shift there, and he met a young airman named Madden, and they went bar hopping together that night. What we know about Mr. Madden was that he was from the military base, but he was dressed in dungarees and a leather jacket that night, which were pretty coded garments for that time, particularly for the places he was going. Dobbins asked him back to his apartment to have a drink. And Madden grabbed the 2 silver candlesticks and bludgeoned him to death. In the courtroom trial and in the newspaper, repeatedly the victim was portrayed as the predator. So Mr. Dobbins was the criminal because he was a gay man who was assaulting these young, healthy American military men, right? So the guy who killed him with the candlestick got off. He literally served no time. And so for me, for that presentation, just thinking about who's we, at this moment, we're not only excluded, we're silent and silenced. South Carolina was weird at that point. Santee Thompson, who used to be here as a public history student, wrote his master's thesis on this event. Noticed that coverage of the newspaper trial talked about how quiet the whole place was. South Carolina doesn't like to talk about these things, even when it's right there in front of them. And the newspaper stories are the ones who went into great detail to talk about Mr. Dobbins' striped sheets and his silver candelabras, just all these ways they could code him as a queer predator rather than the victim of a murder. So that's 1958. Jump up 10 years. 1968, Don Langley Simmons, or Gordon Langley Hall was trans, later claimed to be intersex. So that meant she was born with ambiguous genitalia and was assigned male at birth. She went through gender reassignment surgery at that time at Johns Hopkins University. Was British, was very accepted in Charleston society, wrote biographies of famous people. Abraham Lincoln's wife, various British royalty. And as long as Gordon Langley Hall was this British guy who wrote biographies of famous people, Charleston society loved him. But when he came back as Don Langley Hall, they weren't as happy, obviously. So here was a trans person in 1968. And then Dawn married her chauffeur, fisherman, John Paul Simkins, in January of 1969. I mean, just to think about the virulence. First of all, I like this moment because it suggests how South Carolina was actually at the vanguard on some issues. So they're married in 1969, just in the wake of Loving versus Virginia, right? But it suggests the ways that intersectional issues complicate LGBTQ rights in this state. The Charleston paper ran their wedding announcement in the obituaries. So just think about that. And I actually think that feels meaningful in some very awful ways, the ways in which certain things assign us a social death, right? Even if we're still alive. So to run the wedding on the obituary page was a way of declaring them both socially dead. Their wedding gifts, which were in a big crate on the sidewalk, were bombed, firebombed. The church that they were supposed to hold their service in was threatened with a bombing, so they had to have the service in someone's private home. They later left Charleston and moved, I think, to Virginia. Anyway, fascinating story. Edward Ball has written about it. He questions whether or not Dawn later became pregnant and had a child. He questions whether or not she was pregnant. It's just a crazy, crazy story. But we do know, I mean, that we have an important trans figure, trans activist at this point in South Carolina, and an important, I want to call it a queer marriage, because a trans person marries a person of a different race, which was in our Constitution, as you know, until 1998. Miscegenation laws were in our Constitution until 1998 in South Carolina, even though Loving versus Virginia made them no longer enforceable. Damn it, in South Carolina, we like our bigotry and our symbolism, so we kept it in there until we had a constitutional referendum in 98, and then it barely passed. And then Republican legislators were on the front of the state newspaper saying how important it was to keep it for its symbolism, because God didn't intend the races to mix. That was legislators talking. Then the third moment, 1982, the founding of PFLAG. What I did with the people that were in the Department of Justice is talked about how these questions of belonging are really questions of scale. It's not just do you belong to a nation or a state or community or city, but do you belong in your own family? So after Harriet Hancock's son came out to her in 1980, she founded PFLAG. This would be the first existing LGBTQ rights organization in the state. The Progressive Network and Becky Robbins have written a really lovely biography of her that I think was on the page as well. Brett's holding it up so you can see it.
They have copies.
And they have copies. It's also online for free, I believe, right?
It is.
It is. So this would be an important moment as well. Right after this, obviously, HIV/AIDS hits the state. And so for me, the next really important moment is going to be April 20th, 1989. The legislature was proposing laws that would have quarantined people who were HIV positive. They made it a felony to knowingly transmit the virus to someone else, and other laws. They also made it where you could not get anonymous testing. So people were leaving the state to go elsewhere to get testing because they didn't want their names in the South Carolina Department, DHEC. They didn't want their names listed with DHEC as someone with HIV. So local activists, particularly Diana, an African-American hair salon owner who was also a grassroots AIDS activist, organized a kids group called AIDS Busters, who went to youth community organizations to do safe sex education and distribute condoms. But she got in contact with ACT UP. Columbia, South Carolina was the first place in the nation, other than major metropolitan areas like New York, DC, San Francisco, that ACT UP demonstrated. So we were the first place they targeted outside of that. So it was people from New York. It was an ACT UP organization from Atlanta, Georgia, and then local people here. This happened on a Thursday. Think about that. It's not on a weekend. It's on a Thursday when downtown is busy. First, they did a kiss-in on the State House grounds just to make the point that HIV was not spread through casual contact. So these two pictures are from that, and there are pictures from Diana that are in the archives at USC. And then they walked into the intersection of Main Street and Gervais and had a die-in. And I assume you all know what a die-in is, when people just lay out as if they're corpses. Midday on a weekday at the intersection of Main and Gervais. And just think about I can't imagine people who were coming out of office buildings or going to lunch and wondering, what in the fuck is this, right? 41 people were arrested. There's a great piece in the New York Times by David Levitt. Somebody asked a question?
I think it was just a cough.
A cough, sorry. There's a great piece in the New York Times at that New York Times Magazine about this. David Levitt, who was a novelist and who was a member of ACT UP New York, came down here, and he talked about they were watching TV. All these, fancy New York activists in a hotel somewhere in Main Street, South Carolina. They're watching TV, and some South Carolina guy comes on the TV wearing a mask, which we're familiar with now, but he was wearing it because it was the mask he had worn when he went to see his friend who had passed away from AIDS, right? Complications from HIV. And he was wearing it for the interview with a silence equal death button over the top of the mask. He talked about why he had marched. He talked about AIDS in the state. The interviewer then asked him if he would be willing to say his name. And all the New York activists thought, oh, he's not going to do that because this is South Carolina. He took off his mask. He said his name. He said the small town in South Carolina where he was from. And he said that he was so angry that he was never going to hide again. And I love the David Levitt essay because he talks about how all these savvy activists were so blown away, and someone started crying, and someone lost their contact, and so they're all getting on the floor to look for the contact, just as a way of hiding the fact that they were also moved by this South Carolina guy coming out on South Carolina television at this moment. So it is outside activists, they like to say in South Carolina, outside people coming in. But it was a mix of Atlanta, New York, and Columbia activists who staged this. And this was a tipping point. So up to this point, there had been small organizations that had tried to start and then faltered. There had been university organizations. There was PFLAG. There had been quiet picnics. And that fall, 1989, there was a picnic out at, what is it called? Dreer Island. And Harriet and some other people you all know this story, walked around with a clipboard and asked people, if we had a Pride March, would you be there? And so the next year was the first Pride March, June 23rd, 1990. And for me, this is a picture, I think it's from Matt Tischler. It's used on the front of the Historic Columbia, by the way, has, just a quick aside, Historic Columbia has an amazing webpage called LGBTQ Columbia History Initiative. It has oral histories from lots and lots of people, including Bert Easter sitting back there. Has lots of pictures. It has maps of where all the bars were, where all the churches were. There's also a map for where acts of violence were committed against gay and lesbian people. It's an amazing, amazing resource that they put online for anybody to use. I'm going to say, I think one of my favorite oral histories is Terrence Henderson. Not yours, Bert, sorry. Terrence Henderson, who talks about the first time he went to a gay bar was Metropolis downtown, a very white gay bar. And then he and his boyfriend at the time went down the street to the candy shop, the African-American bar. And I just love that he goes to both. It's his moment of coming out. So first he goes to the white bar, but then when he goes to the African-American, the black gay bar, just the different community, the different way he felt there. It's a lovely, lovely oral history. But the reason I like this picture, which is from that website, is because they did not plan to go on the State House steps. So they marched down Main Street, and they were going to have all the big talks like we did for years there on the grid. We used to call that the griddle outside the State House, because in the summer, when you had Pride in the summer, it was just ridiculously hot. But they had planned to stop there for all the speechifying, but instead they just spontaneously rushed up the steps. And I love that because it's as if they're claiming that space. that it's their house too. And I love the spontaneity of it. And I love how it's using your own body to claim a position, claim a space, claim a history. We're part of this too. And they're all there with the emblem that year was the pink balloon, and they were using the pink triangle and Stonewall as two of their images as well. And you can see a little tiny rainbow flag up there as well. The rainbow flag starts to take over in the late 90s as the emblem of LGBTQ issues. Anyway, so those were, I just thought it'd be fun to look at those 5 moments of history and the pictures I have from them. I will also add, if you're interested, the Hollings Library at USC has created an exhibit of it's called telling the story. I'm going to get the name wrong. Basically, telling the story of our nights and days. And it's a history of LGBTQ South Carolina and beyond. So as you walk to the front of Thomas Cooper Library at USC, there's a giant rainbow flag state of South Carolina shape. And it says there's a gay and lesbian history inside. So I love that was up when parents were here with their kids moving into the university. When you go in there on the first floor, on the elevators are pulp fiction books, and also this book, which some of you may know, Out Loud, which I would say is the first oral history of LGBTQ South Carolina, which has a lovely, lovely essay by Becky Robbins. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see you. Stop share. So a lovely essay by Becky Robbins about being an AIDS buddy during the epidemic. Anyway, that's there. And on the 5th floor, there are also images, and there are racy pulp fiction covers. And then when you go in the back, it's a big exhibit. And I love that they're doing this in the midst of all this anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-tell the truth about history initiatives. They have put on an exhibit that tells the truth. And it has some lovely things. There's a whole exhibit of children's books. There's a whole exhibit of comic books. One of my favorite being, what is her name? See, I'm up here and I forget. What is her name? The first trans superhero. Her 2 powers are she can dissolve, coagulate. That's her name. Her 2 powers are dissolve and coagulate things. So I love that the first trans superhero, what she can do is change forms. She either makes things that are liquid or light or energy into coagulated stuff, and things that are solid, she makes them dissolve. So that's there. There's a whole case of pulp fiction books, most of which I donated for the exhibit. And just some lovely, lovely things as well. Like you all know Maurice Sendak, who wrote Where the Wild Things Are. There's a postcard that he drew for his former lover, he was gay, of himself as Max, which makes me rethink Where the Wild Things Are in lots of ways, if he's imagining Max as a little queer kid. So anyway, that little private postcard is part of the collections there. So it's a lovely exhibit, and I recommend it highly. So that's all I want to say. I want to stop right there, and I would like you guys to ask me questions or tell me things.
Thank you.
I failed to mention that it's Dr. Madden, and Dr. Madden actually has an earned doctorate in various aspects of English language. He has a very special focus in Irish poetry,
Yes.
or Irish literature,
Yes.
and he gets invited to wonderful places around the world because his brilliance is recognized globally.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
And Dr. Madden, you did not speak of any kind of bumps in the road in doing organizing.
So no, it's hard to talk about.
Internally, I'm not talking about
Oh,
the
right.
bad people, I'm talking about your allies. So
Right. So you all, I hope you read the little piece I had written back in 2007. Because what I say in that is one thing to talk about intersectionality in an academic context. It's another thing entirely to see how the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality start to work out on the ground level when you're doing the work. And I gave some examples there of isolated but difficult moments. I mean, one of them was when we had 2 people of color who were in the upstate at a bar doing a bar fundraiser, and they heard one of the local organizers, not some attendee, racist attendee, but one of the organizers say, keep the money away from the Mexicans. I told about a moment where we had an Indian American, not indigenous Native American, but Indian American, who was one of our PR people, and an older white woman from Charleston, who was a PR person, told her on the phone that English must be her second language. And what she later claimed was a claim about expertise actually felt like racism. So I talked about those kinds of moments where things happen that you realize all the things. So here's the thing. Most people in other movements grow up in communities that either identify or support those movements. If you're an African-American, a Black person, mostly you grow up in a Black community. If you're a working class person doing labor organizing, mostly you have grown up in a working class or a fragile, a precarious community. But if you're a gay person or a lesbian person or a queer or trans or bi person, not only did you not likely grow up in a community that you recognized yourself in, you could even have grown up in the most intimate community, your family, that saw you as an awful thing, right? So the result of that is, because we grow up in so many different social environments, is that all the things that fracture the state, racism, sexism, classism, ageism, all those things fracture our community, because those are the places we come from when we try to make a community that's LGBTQ, right? And I even say in that essay that I think community should be in quotes, and it really should be plural, because we come from such different places. The only thing that unites us is our sense of sexual difference from the normative culture around us. But I didn't say, I mean, I get what you're asking, Brett, but I didn't say in that essay, the things we tried to do right? So we tried to hire people of color, and people of color were in leadership roles in a way that belied the actual South Carolina Equality Group, which was mostly white and upper middle class mostly, I would say, right? But our campaign organization was a different thing entirely. I want to tell one other story about a guy who was going to revoke all his funding from us because we were trying to do anti-racism work as part of our neighborhood training. But again, we tried to do things that were making a difference. And also just honestly, during the year of that campaign, year and a half, I had to always say, we're going to win this. I was the head of the campaign group, but we all knew we were going to lose it. So the thing was, we had to think we were going to lose forward. So even if we did not win the ballot, we wanted to win in other ways. We wanted to raise our community. We wanted to increase organizing and networking. I mean, I quote in there the institute that pointed out that after those 2004 and 2006 marriage amendments, in all the states that saw those, on the next census, more LGBTQ people registered as same-sex couples. So what they suggested, the Williams Institute, was that we did in some ways win forward, that people recognize the importance of being visible, of being counted, of being out, of being connected to other LGBTQ people. So we tried to do some things right as well. But I get what you're saying. I mean,
well, there's a presumption that people that are gay must be progressive.
And they're not. I mean, yeah, I mean, so I came out in Austin, where most of the gay people I met were progressive. There was a kind of group of gays who were the upper middle class white men who had their own parties, and probably there were Republicans among them, but the people I knew were mostly progressive. When I moved here, I realized that was not the case. For me, the glaring example was when Bert and I this was when Bert was, I think, president of GLPM. We wanted to join the Progressive Network and protesting the Confederate flag, take it down. And one of our board members said he who had been helping fund a lot of the work, said he would withdraw all his donations, and he would organize people to boycott us because that was not our issue, right? Which was a stunner to me. And so Bert and I went as Bert and Ed, right? We didn't take the GLPM, the Gay Pride banner, because the organization did not want us to do it. I do think it wasn't the whole organization. I think it was a couple of very loud people who gave lots of money, but that was the position they put us in. Yeah, so, question.
Speak up so people up there can hear you.
People there.
How did you work to recover from that emotionally? Because I think now that there are a lot of us who don't want to say that we're Christians because the Christians that are loudest embarrass us, and we can't believe that. So when you say that, you had bigots in your organization, even a racist, the flag thing. I mean, it had to really disappoint you and hurt you.
Yeah.
Or surprise, and all that. How do you?
I will say one thing and Bert would probably agree with me, but one thing that was sustaining was the progressive network. So to move from a space where we felt like people weren't getting it to be part of a space where there were lots of different groups who all realized the importance of supporting one another, right? So I think our involvement in GLPM, the Gay, Lesbian, Pride movement, simultaneous with our involvement in the progressive network, GLPM was often frustrating, although it was important to us, it was vital to us, but progressive network just felt sustaining to us.
Full transparency, Dr. Madden, the founding meeting of the Progressive Network in 1996 it was difficult to engage.
I know that, yeah.
And there were people that I think there was a consensus that racism was the biggest frost to bear in South Carolina. But there were people that said, well, we don't need to spread it too thinly. And I know there were Mac and Ginger, who had a gay son, left in tears. Wow. But we did, as Becky says, cast the net widely. And we went against everybody's advice to focus. Yeah, people from the outside that had started groups in Georgia and Missouri. The Missouri group was labor centric, and the Georgia group was low-income and housing centric. And they said, you'll never make it if you have everybody at the table. Well, we didn't make any money, but we certainly have built a lot of bridges.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are people I know now that I would not know had I not been part of the network. I just think it's like someone like Cookie Washington, who organized that great anti-violence, anti-gun violence show down in Charleston. It was sustaining, is sustaining. But I get what you're saying, and I think the fact that you asked specifically about Christians, I mean, there are a number of ways to talk about this, and I know Tom Summers is sitting in the room too. Tom organized the first clergy organization that marched in the Gay Pride Parade, in part to make the point that there was a group of clergy.
Draw the Reverend out. He's like, looks like he wants to say something.
You want to say something, Tom? You're muted right now, Tom. You'll have to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Marilyn.
Becky, can you unmute him? No, he's muted. There you go.
Nope, his microphone's
no.
still red. Reverend Summers is a pillar of justice and true Christianity, and has been involved in the progressive movement since I was a child, and he was protesting racism within the Methodist Church in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Tom, we can't hear you.
You're still muted, Tom.
How about now?
Oh,
You're there.
Okay, success. Yeah, in 1990, of course, you've already mentioned the first Pride March. I think that now they call these the Pride Parades, but this was a Gay Pride March.
Yeah.
And I think that it showed some advocacy and people that were really out to help change some of the viewpoints of South Carolina. And we got together because in 1990, I think SLED had to be called out for the first Pride March to be on the top of the building because there were death threats circulating all around. And in 1991 and 1992, I got together a group of, as you've already mentioned, Ed, a group of people behind a banner saying South Carolina clergy and friends supporting rights of gays and lesbians. Back then, there was no overall term like LGBTQ plus, just gays and lesbians. So we got together about 30 clergy and other friends to march in the Pride March. And I'll never forget the number of sidewalk preachers that were running up and down the sidewalk condemning us, saying that we were going to hell and all sorts of stuff like that. And I even got some letters that was sent to my bishop, who was African-American bishop at that time. Some people in the United Methodist Church wanted to get rid of me because I was standing up for gays and lesbians. And so he wrote back to these people. He sent me copies of this. And he wrote back to these people that were complaining about my ordination as a minister. And he said, but Reverend Summers is entitled to minister to all persons. And he would capitalize all, A-L-L. That meant so much to me. And so we were at that whole effort for about 15, 16 years. And then the South Carolina Pride March was then called a Pride Parade, which it is now, more colorful and showing more acceptance of people. And so I just thought that little bit of history about how tough it was on the people who were planning those pride marches and coming out, trying to come out to provoke change. There was some vicious reactions. I grew up down in Orangeburg in about the mid 1930s, and back then the word queer was a very derogatory term against people that was kind of like they were called sissies, that sort of thing. And now it's so gratifying to see when the word queer is used, is used with kind of some reverence, reverence. And that just shows you how much has changed. But there's also an undercurrent of people fighting back who are more conservative and radical in their views of still trying to deny people reading in books, book banning and all that kind of stuff. So those are a few things I wanted to remark on, but I feel so gratified for people like Ed Madden, and gosh, you mentioned Harriet Hancock. She and I did so many things together, and she was a vital resource. She's really considered to be the mother of the whole pride movement in this state. And she's endured many decades of wonderful work. I wish you were here tonight. I really do.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you, Tom. I want to tell people that we recognized you as a leader and a hero many years ago, and you still deserve the fame, sir. Thank you so much for all your years of work.
Well, I appreciate the Progressive Network. I was there when it was founded, and I've hung in there ever since then. I don't drive too much at night now, but in about 14 months, I'll be 90 years old. But man, it's great to hang in there, and I feel like I'm there with you, Brett.
Thank you, Tom. Tom just has his hand up.
Yeah, Ann has her hand up.
Yes, I do. Y'all, please pardon me. I'm in the middle of a COVID infection, so I'm a little scattered. Thank you so much for this event this evening. It was great to hear your presentation, Dr. Madden. And I wonder if that was Thorne Compton in the ACT UP photo. It looked like it could have been him. I'm up here in Greenville, and a lot of the, it's tough to find like-minded folks up here. It's pretty rough. But one of the things that I find a lot of times when we do go to events that are more geared toward liberal folks, there is a lot of, and you guys have spoken to this a little bit, there's a lot of lack of education and inclusion for the TQIA end of the alphabet on LGBTQIA. And I have sat in some conversations and just really been stunned as to the lack of sensitivity and I've spoken out. I'm the proud parent of a queer child and an educator and a longtime ally. And it really troubles me how big of a lack of education and understanding of gender expansiveness and also the diversity of sexualities that we're that we're able to celebrate and include these days. And I just wonder, with bills like 3728 and a lot of this these attacks on our LGBTQIA kids and students especially, if there's an opportunity to educate more folks who are of a like mind on a lot of issues, but really are undereducated on this aspect and lack a lot of understanding. And so I've kind of been thinking about the possibility of multi-generational opportunities. When we did Angels in America at the Warehouse Theater back in 2014, we did a year's worth of educational outreach events to go along with that. And one of them was a multi-generational evening where we invited folks from, we had a couple who had been at Stonewall. We had folks who had been, working in the, for Aid Upstate for many years, and all the way to young people, high school students, and even middle schoolers at the time, and had a resource fair. And it was an evening that spoke about LGBT history and also the looking forward as well, and seeing what our future was going to be. And as I am in my classroom with these brilliant Gen Z students who are so articulate about who they are and so inclusive of one another, I just wonder what opportunities we could find to bring together the generations to talk about the history of activism and of allyship and of advocacy, and then also learn from these young people. Because I think there's something special and we need them. And I don't know, how long they're going to be in a state like South Carolina where they can't have reproductive freedom and can't identify as who they are. But I hope that, I don't know, just kind of wanted to bring that up as a conversation as an educator and a parent. I'm just real concerned the way things are headed.
Yeah. Sorry, I should look up here. Me too. I teach an intro to queer studies course at USC, and this last semester, and Governor Henry McMaster declared that genderqueer is pornographic literature because it's one of the most challenged books by the Moms for Liberty, or whatever they euphemistically call themselves. So I taught it, and my experience in that class, number one, was that I had two kids say, I have never seen myself represented in a book before, which just sort of blew me away. Like, I didn't know how to respond. But the other thing is, I think you're right that the education has to be multi-directional. It's one thing to teach the history, but they're teaching me about ace and aro, aromantic and asexual identities. We had great conversations about that, and they knew more than I did. So I think you're right that we need context within which we can talk across generations. I'm just gonna say, I love that you guys did all that around Angels in America, but we need to think of other ways and more ways to do this. I don't know if you know there's a filmmaker here, Robbie Robertson, who just did a film. It's going through lots of film festivals right now. It's called Common as Red Hair. And the title, I don't think it's online yet because it's still doing the festival circuit, but it should be soon. It's a tiny short film about an intersex kid. And the point about the title comes from the fact that intersexuality is just as common a genetic expression as red hair. Right. And so, we talked about anti-gay bills almost every day in that class last spring. We had to keep talking about the news, and it was like every day was something from somewhere. Right. But one time someone brought in a right-wing group was starting a t-shirt campaign that was something like God made, I think was what it said across the top. And it was like the little things on a restroom door with the male and female. So this way in which theology is imagined as the grounding for this very rigid gender binary, which simply isn't true, right? I mean, I think you're right, the ways that people simply don't know. But the problem is that ignorance then becomes expressed as hostility and as censorship and as fear. Yeah,
And
I don't have
I fear, I'm sorry, I fear as apathy too within the ranks of the more progressive sometimes. That I'm not going to make the phone call about the legislation that's anti-trans because I don't get it, you know? You know what I mean? That's what I fear too.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No. I mean, you just make me think. I don't know what to say in response other than that I think you're right. We need to figure out more ways to educate the community. And I think outside the classroom, it's one thing for me to teach an intro to queer studies for everybody who shows up is engaged, even if they're not queer. But it's another thing entirely to try to talk about these issues in public context.
Can you put it in your real life view of what we hear from the Republican legislature and the people that have dropped hypocrisy are just anti-gay? But what you're talking about with the students, you're not supposed to be doing this stuff, Dr. Madden.
No, I'm at the university and I'm teaching a queer studies course. Now, according to Ron DeSantis, both the women's studies program and a queer studies course should not exist in higher education either.
Right. What kind of pushback are you getting from the administration?
None.
Because of their sensitivity to the fact what they're funding.
None, because we have a women's and gender studies program. So until we have a Ron DeSantis take over and forbid gender studies and African American studies programs in higher education, it's a legitimate academic.
Dr. Madden was the director or chair of the Women and Gender Studies program a couple of years ago.
Yeah, for 8 years. Yeah. But the thing to remember too is African American studies and women's and gender studies both moved from being interdisciplinary programs, which means they're kind of out here on the side. They're not really official. They don't have a place at the table, the faculty senate, all that kind of stuff, to being departments within this last year, both of them. So in a moment when the state is reacting against these issues, at least in the College of Arts and Sciences at the university, they have further institutionalized these issues. So both programs are now 50 years old.
But you're not getting institutional pressure from the academic leadership. What about the students? I mean, I've heard you say that you've had graduate students that were playing gotcha as far as political correctness went.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember this conversation.
Okay, never mind. But it's just I was trying to probe your daily, your weekly life in terms of bringing up these issues in class.
Yeah.
Response from the students, response from the faculty, response from the legislators. It's kind of those different circles that
Gotcha.
Affect your ability to teach.
Gotcha. I mean,
And they may not. You can say they don't.
well, they do and they don't. I mean, I should say that when I first came to the university, and this was back in 1994, I was told not to teach a gay and lesbian lit class until after I got tenured, because that would make my position precarious to actually do that visibly. And when we first had an LGBTQ studies course at USC in the women's studies program, it was called sexual diversity. And that was a way of hiding from the legislature and those who would freak out what the course was actually about. We've since changed it to just LGBTQ studies. That's what it is. So yeah, there are institutional contexts, and we have to. So the bill that was originally at the legislature also forbade CRT, critical race theory, and classes like that in higher education. Luckily, they took that out, but they're still going after K through 12. I mean, already our students show up afraid to talk about controversial issues if they went through the school system in South Carolina. I think this will make it even more so. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer your question, Brett, and I don't remember that conversation, but I do think.
Brett, might be remembering Vernon Davenport and your publication.
That was a long time ago, though.
I know, it's a long time ago. Yeah.
So yeah, my third semester at USC, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but my third semester at USC, there was a right-wing paper at the university called the Carolina Spectator. And one of their reporters sat in on my, one of the ways I got around not teaching gay and lesbian literature was to teach AIDS literature. So if it's AIDS literature, it's medical humanities, even though it was all gay literature. But one of those students wrote about me and published I was doxxed before the phrase doxxed exists. He put my home address and home phone number in their little tabloid, and said, if you're concerned about Dr. Madden's unorthodox teaching, you may find him at.
Oh.
And that was my third semester. I didn't know anyone here. I stopped walking to school. I was in an apartment near campus and I stopped walking, especially after dark, because I would stay late and work, and I just didn't do that anymore.
Oh, God, yeah.
I had an attorney for 2 years because I was sure if I got gay bashed, I was going to sue the fuckers.
That's
Because
okay.
it was an open invitation to gay bashing, right? And it's the reason I still don't have a listed phone number. But nothing happened. And in fact, the only harassment I got was for a week, university students calling my phone and saying, Dr. Madden, South Carolina really isn't like that. I'm sorry this happened. But you know, when you get 30 or 40 of those a day, you're just like, oh my God, no more. But nothing bad happened from that. You know what? I kind of feel like, what's a way of saying this? Becky's gonna record this and post it online, so I'm not gonna say the thing I really want to say.
Yeah.
Well, no, so, you know, I used to be scared. But now I'm a full professor. I teach queer studies courses. The students who show up for that course aren't going to go after me. They want to be there. And repeatedly, I do a thing in class, which I love. I do a postcard evaluation. So I have index cards. I hand out index cards in class, and you write down an exclamation, something you're excited to learn, and you write a question mark, some question you have, and no questions are stupid. And you don't write your name on it. And for me, it's such useful feedback. And this kind of goes back to Ann's question. I don't know if you've ever done this in class, Ann, but it gives them a space to ask the questions they're scared to raise aloud in class, right?
Yes.
So that, and I use those all the time. And what I've discovered is I have lots of queer kids who don't know any history, but I have lots of straight kids, mostly women, but not always, who just want to be allies and don't know the right language and don't know the right things to say. And they are scared to death they're going to use the wrong word in class. And so I love them because they ask those kinds of questions in their index cards, which then opens up a space. We need to talk about this issue. We need to talk about this phrase. We need to talk about this identity in class. So all that to say now, I taught genderqueer this spring in my Intro to LGBTQ Studies course. I had this great pedagogical reason that I had created an intro course that was all about coming of age text, because it's in coming of age text about teenagers, where all the issues we worry about are so amplified, right? That's where identity, community, belonging, what church you're in, all those things are just amplified for kids coming out or coming into an identity. So we read those coming of age texts. So I had a pedagogical reason, right? So we did Audre Lorde's Zombie. We did Heartstopper, the sweet Netflix series. I assume some of you have seen it. No, it's very sweet. It's a British show about kids. But you know, secretly, I just wanted to teach genderqueer because Henry McMaster said it was pornography and it was forbidden and was demanding that it be taken out of every public high school library in this state. Right. And this was the book, too, that I had 2 students say, I've never seen myself in a book before. So what I told them, too, is that they didn't want to keep the book, to please donate it to their local library after the class was over. So that's, yeah. So that was my little to the discourse of Henry McMaster, who clearly has not read the book. But, you know, they called it out loud. They called this little book pornographic. Hold it up. And the opening essay is Harriet's grandson talking about what it's like to have a gay uncle. But this was pornography. But that's because the literal representation to people who don't want you to know about this is pornography, even if there's nothing sexual about it. So, another question? Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm thinking about the K through 12, especially group, and I was trying to listen for things that we could take back to. We live in Lexington School District 2.
Gotcha.
And this is my son, who's a senior, who's gotten onto the school board meeting attendance, you know.
And he's a graduate of the Modjeska school.
He is.
Cool.
But you said one thing that I really think, practically speaking, could be used, maybe. You said that our children from South Carolina schools who come to your university are not prepared to talk about controversial
Of any kind.
of any kind.
Yeah.
And that is true, isn't it? I mean, it's because they aren't given an opportunity.
Mhm.
Which means that they are not talking about current events at all in any class. Not in English, not in any social studies class, not even in a civics class, or an economics class. They have run so far away from talking about anything that can be construed as political. And I mean, you being in higher academics, could you see any way we could go to the Board of Education and say, look, I mean, this is
Not
a
with who we-
deciding marker right here.
I mean, they could,
We are hindering.
I mean, frankly, I hate to say this, but I'm depressed right now about education in South Carolina. Ellen Weaver, she just cut off conversation with the South Carolina Library Association. She cut off connection with the professional group, which becomes her way to target individual librarians, her way to do what she wants to do with libraries. I mean, we elected a theocratic fascist as the head of the Department of Education here.
An incredibly unqualified one too.
A master's.
A staggeringly unqualified one.
I mean,
She
2
has a
weeks
fake
ago-
master's. She's never been in the classroom. Yeah,
2 weeks ago, part of a school board meeting was arguing about like a picture book, Bathe the Cat. Because there's two daddies in the pictures, I mean,
and the
and
thing,
the lady
so
that's
the
talking
really,
about it is like you said, when we came in, Brett, they're not, the language isn't couched. They just come out and say it,
yeah,
that this is evil and the authors who wrote these books have an evil
and the
agenda.
really sad thing is there are likely kids in that school with two
Yes.
dads and two moms
Mhm.
who, like the kid in my classroom who said, I've never seen myself in a book before. They have never seen their family in a book before. I start with Audre Lorde Sami. So it's an African-American memoir. And she goes to the library in New York City, the New York Public Library, and she reads storybooks, and she points out she has never seen herself in a storybook. So this is in the 50s, right? But the same lesson applies, is that you are preventing people from seeing their own identities and their own communities represented. I'm sorry,
It's worse than not being, sadly, it's worse than that. You're being told that you're hated.
True.
I mean,
It's not just that you don't
it's
exist.
worse, it's hate speech.
Have no value.
I'm sorry.
No. So, and this does affect higher education in some ways. So I'm going to a conference in Florida. And we considered canceling the conference because of Florida. But the people who are putting it on are making it like, they made the theme of it be inclusion. They've got a lesbian poet coming in to do one of the keynote speeches and a feminist scholar doing one of the other keynotes. So they're going out of the way to make it clear that we're in a safe space. But it's probably going to be it's an Irish Studies conference, but it's probably going to be one of the worst attended regional Irish Studies conferences because it's in Florida. And we had non-binary trans students, grad students say they did not want to travel there, that even if they were guaranteed that the hotel and the conference spaces would be safe spaces for them, that did not mean they could trust the state of Florida or be in an airport and have someone challenge them going to a bathroom in an airport, right? So it's frightening.
There's a school in, I think it's Tennessee, where the school board was taken over and appointed a director to it, who decided that the school needed to, they eliminated the library and made it a disciplinary hall.
Saw that, yeah.
And that's, I think, part of this national movement of the fascist flow in our country, is to get rid of, you got to get rid of the literature, you got to get rid of the art, and you have to have a subjected people that can be targeted by the rest as the other. And it's just so obvious that what's going on.
Ed, can I just say, I really want to respect your time. I know it's getting late and you're a busy guy, I think.
And there's cake on the table back there too.
Well, I don't want to keep you from it, but I wanted to just say really briefly, I think that it's really easy to forget just how dangerous this work has been for some of the people that have been doing it for a long time. and that we all owe them a really deep debt of gratitude for that kind of bravery and sustained commitment to a vision that I think that it's hard to see it sometimes, but I think we're making progress. And I think I'm the most cynical person I know, and I still really, really appreciate the gay community because they got me involved in activism in the first place a century ago. And I think that I've been searching for that kind of community since then, because I think what doesn't ever get really talked about but what I think is really at the essence of all the work that we do is building community, and this movement building is all about sustaining relationships. And so knowing Ed and knowing Bert for all of these decades now, knowing Tom and knowing Harriet and these people that are just such luminaries, it's just an honor and a privilege to know them and to take comfort from that kind of dedication and spirit. But I would also like to invite Anne and anybody else who's interested, Tom, anybody else that you think might want to be at the table, how we can create programming through the Modjeska School that serves those very communities that we're talking about. You know, they're very marginalized, as you know, the stuff's not going away. How can we create intersectional work that floats everybody's boats, but also that's very targeted to kind of what is happening in South Carolina on the ground, and how we can all support what's doable, or let's even just talk about what that would kind of look like. And in the meantime, just make this history available to people. And that's why I'm so grateful to you, Ed, tonight. I know you're so busy, y'all, you don't even know. Please Google the guy. He's everywhere all the time. And I hope you will promote your stuff coming up. He's doing a reading at Grow next month. So I hope you have another chance to see him and read his wonderful writing. He's so gifted, and I'm blabbering, but please, I just really, really appreciate your time and invite anybody that's interested in making this kind of a programming available through the school. Please get in touch with us and let's talk about it further.
Thank you, Becky.
It looks like Steve has his hand up.
Just want to add one thing. I really appreciate you all being here. Ed, Progressive Network, everybody. You're all old, as I am. And I just want to give you some encouragement. I know some younger people, including my daughter, who are not afraid of these issues and are not afraid of choosing their identity and being strong. I just want you to know that exists. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't need us necessarily. They're there doing it.
Becky, this is Tom. I heard you say, did we have any suggestions that might be offered to the Modjeska Simkins School about future curricula? It might be well to consider how much negative religion, that is punitive religion, has combined to make historically the political scene in South Carolina a very mean, unthoughtful effort. So that might be one kind of theme that you'd want to think about, how you could have perhaps a theologian who's very non-punitive with theology, along with the historian, to do some dialogue. That just might be one kind of suggestion to have you think about.
Thank you, Tom. We'll book you.
I want to go back and I love what Steve said, and also I love what all of you are saying, but on the thing about young people. So for me, I've always, as an example at USC, talked about when I first came to USC, the LGBTQ student group, which was then called GLSA, Gay and Lesbian Student Association, was mostly upperclassmen and grad students, and they met in a different building, and they did not advertise where they were, which meant they were mostly coming out at college and mostly closeted, right? Or coming into who they were. Now they host drag shows. The last time I was a sponsor, it was mostly freshmen and sophomores, which means they came out in grad school or were ready to hit the ground running when they got to college. But just this week in my Irish Lit class, I taught a lesbian vampire story from 1872 called Carmilla. And in it, of course, they killed the vampire because this was a story that inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it's a lesbian vampire story. And what struck me this time when I taught it was how many students wanted it to have a happy ending. They wanted the female vampire and her victim to have a love story. And I said, it was 1872, but this was what they wanted. So I was fascinated. In the past, when I've taught this, students are like, wow, a lesbian story from 1872. And we talk about the fact that, you know, the word didn't exist at that point, but there were still ways people thought about same-sex sexuality. But man, the very first comment in class was this was yesterday, was I hated the ending because they killed her, right? So, and this is not a queer studies course. This is an Irish Lit course. So I think you're right. I think there are ways I get depressed because of what's happening right now, but there are also ways in which I think this is the last gasp of a particular political community because they know what's coming up behind them. Because these kids, this again, it wasn't a queer studies or feminist studies course. It's Irish Lit. It's English majors and history majors in there. Again, that may skew a little liberal too compared to the rest of the university, but still, it was for me a nice empowering moment, I guess I would say.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Well, I need to be careful how I phrase this because I don't want to let any elected officials off the hook. They chose to run for the positions they're in, so you know they should be held to higher scrutiny. But I attended this school board meeting 2 weeks ago where they were talking about a bunch of books, some of which were like, you know, The Hate You Give, and you know,
Talk about what? Bunch of books.
Sorry. Yeah, some of which were, you know, very famous, like The Hate You Give, but there was also that, you know, pretty silly one, like the Bathe the Cat, which there was nothing offensive in there at all, but you know,
Except
to the bigots,
the fact
to the
of a
bigots
queer
they
family,
were.
yeah.
And I was partly frustrated that this was even brought up to begin with, but I was mainly disappointed that of all the things that this person said, Melanie Schultz, she ran for office last year. Fortunately, she did not win, but she came close. So nothing was called out. And I contacted the school board, and my mom's spoken with one of the members of the school board about it. And I get the feeling that these people, some of them are, you know, partisan and all that, but they're in fear of the, you know, the intimidation that's going on by, you know, extremists on the, you know, radical right.
Yeah.
But they're movable. Henry McMaster, the legislature, they're not movable, but people in our communities, they have hearts and they can be reached. We just have to show them who really makes up the community. Because I won't say who, but I had one person on the board actually thank me for sending the email and say, you know, that really represents how we feel. We just don't feel like we can say it.
Yeah.
So
if you're interested, there is a group of high school students at Buford High School who started an organization because Moms for Liberty went there. Like for of the 112 books, 90 something of them were immediately challenged down in Buford. Anyway, they have started an organization. They're getting traction, and I know that Jennifer Bartell Boykin at Spring Valley is trying to start a chapter here in Columbia. So that might be I forget the name of it. Do you remember, Bert, the name? But it's a group of high school students in Buford who are fighting for academic freedom in high school libraries, basically, that we should be able to read things. Books should not be censored in libraries. If you look, I mean, we can Google it and find them, but they're also affiliated with the Pat Conroy Center in Buford, so they could definitely get you in touch with them as well.
I think Ann said she was an educator, a teacher,
yes,
something like that. So, you know, it's worth stating. Sorry, I used to talk about just many people. that, there are good people out there, but if we don't push back against the rhetoric that's going on, all the good ones are gonna leave, and we'll be stuck with all the crazies and the bigots, and we don't want that, so.
No, we don't.
We just want to encourage all the good people out there who do have authority, whether it's, high up or whether it's at the very bottom, to keep doing what they're doing. So that's all.
Well, Dr. Madden, I don't want to put too happy face on the circumstances this evening, but I want to tell you that when I was at the University of South Carolina 50 years ago, the women they had to be in the dorms by 10, they had to wear dresses. And so there's been some progress there. But to hear you talk about your sense of freedom there, I'm really relieved.
Yeah.
And that what I'm talking to people about and talking to people at the South Carolina Educational Association and working with I'm now a member of the South Carolina Council of Social Studies Teachers. Anybody can join for $10. That there's a sense of we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so the enforcement is not working. But
Because it's not enforcement yet, it's intimidation right now.
the intimidation is the intimidation is certainly intimidating people, but there are people pushing back. We're hearing that. But the thing that I've seen most, if somebody asked me what my takeaway was from 50 years of grassroots organizing in South Carolina, it's fear. We ran a newspaper for 12 years, and that was the opportunity to go and talk to people, stick a microphone in their face and say, what do you think? And people would look over their shoulder before they answered. And there's this nameless fear in this land of free and home of the brave. But what is happening, I think, that is going in our favor is that the bad people that are trying to maintain the status quo, and the status quo is the same people that benefited from the Civil War. This is like the white gentry with the money. They've given up hypocrisy. When I was growing up, even the bad people wouldn't come out and say they were white nationalists or that they were racist or that they hated people. That as their ability to be able to sell what product they have shrinks, they're having to resort to fear as a motivating factor. And it's getting smaller and smaller. And we now have the majority of the legislature elected in primaries with less than 15% of the vote. And so these are the times that it's coming around to where we can have a greater effect. And that this is a great time for us to be able to try and make greater steps in implementing a rational value system in this state. And so thank you, Dr. Madden, for being part of it.
Thank you. Just one quick thing. I mean, I know you were trying to do a rousing conclusion. Just a quick historical note. This also on the Historic Columbia page I mentioned earlier, webpage. In the late 1950s, there was a purge of homosexuals at the University of South Carolina. No documents exist, but it's in the oral histories of men who said like 50-something men were kicked out of the university in the late 50s because they found out they were gay.
Yes, the lavender scare, the Red Scare, is really something that we're integrating more into the Modjeska school because it was so profound, and they took out like thousands and thousands of federal employees.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to go there. They didn't want to respond. They just quit. But the fact is that type of repression is something that people, I think, are becoming less immune to. I mean, less immune, more immune. Yes, less immune, but more resistant. More resistant.
Gotcha.
And that's the community that we need to support and build.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Ann, for your comments, and Tom and Steve and Becky and everyone else.
Do we have a date for the book?
Oh, so if you're interested, from my 8 years as the poet laureate for the city of Columbia, I put together a book of poems from that time. So it's called Story of the City. Story of the City, poems occasional and otherwise. And so it has predictable stuff like poems I had to do for the mayor's State of the City address. But it has lots of progressive stuff too. My poem I wrote for the anti-Trump science march. My poem I wrote for the take down the Confederate flag rally. I have a long poem about when marriage equality first came to South Carolina. Yeah, so it'll be fun. I'm going to be here at the Grove Center on October 10th that evening. We haven't set a time yet. What, October 10th, Tuesday, October 10th. Yeah, and I would love to see people here because I'm very happy and very excited about this book.
Dr. Madden, it would be after work sometime. We don't know.
It'll be,
what
yeah, it'll
time.
be after work. It'll be like 6 o'clock, 6:30, somewhere in there.
Over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Y'all come.
So y'all come, join us. Thank you all.
And you Zoom people can stay and watch us eat cake. But we're. Thank you, Connie. Good to see you, Reverend Summers.
See you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
People didn't say anything. Bye-bye, Becky. See you with the cast on it.
Hey, bring me some cake, Brett. Love you, Ed and Bert. Bye.